Hello, and welcome back to the second installment of this document deep dive series about trench combat in this area. Last time we talked about the German operation Waldmeister, which was cancelled because the Russians attacked first, but were then thrown out of the trenches. So if you want to know what all of this is about, you will have to check out the first video. I will not explain that again. What we will talk about today is what the Germans did next. What did they actually implement to gain that mine wood that they were so interested in the last video. Just to give you a really short reminder, this was all in autumn of 1942. The Russian attack was on the 4th of October, and it preempted the German operation by about 40 hours. So what happened next? Anyway, the Germans did what everybody would do. They crossed out on their order the name Waldmeister and replaced it with a new one, namely Hildebrand. So that was the new operation name. They didn't change anything else. In fact, they didn't even bother to cross out Waldmeister in the rest of the document. But it was changed a little bit, not in this document, but we will talk about some changes later. It was increased in scope to a degree. But yeah. Basically, it's now Operation Hildebrand. It was rescheduled to the 7th of October. And we will go through this operation now. First, the planning and the intelligence that the Germans had, and then what actually happened. Now, for the planning, we will actually start with their enemy assessment. There were two enemy rifle regiments in the line in front of them, 120 and 303. These are the reports about the intelligence they had on them. Starting up here, Rifle Regiment 120. The combat strength of the aforementioned companies of the Rifle Regiment 120 can be estimated as greatly reduced. The number of light machine guns is below the target. The companies appear to have an average of 7 to 9 light machine guns. Light mortars are at least partially available. The machine gun company of the 3rd Battalion is said to have only had 2 heavy machine guns and 4 light machine guns. And then you can see here for each company they have average numbers of how many people they believed are in this company. So this is from prisoner and deserter interrogations, and you can see they seem to have quite an accurate idea, or at least believed they had a pretty accurate idea. One thing I have to add here, I'm not sure this was actually written after the 4th of October attack, so this might have been at this point already slightly outdated. As I said, the operation was kind of quickly rebranded. Continuing down here, the combat value of Rifle Regiment 120 is low, especially after the experience gained from the last operations. The Asiatic elements who predominate in the regiment do not show any notable fighting spirit. Throwing in some racism there. In addition, the last replacement, which they mainly provide, appears to be poorly trained and not yet accustomed to the combat conditions. They then go on to Rifle Regiment 303. The combat strength of the Rifle Regiment 303 have also generally fallen sharply. They are said to be around 60 men on average. It is not known whether the 1st and 3rd battalions have been reinforced by replacements. The troops' weapons equipment is also unknown. The regiment's combat value has not yet exceeded that of a defensive force. It must be assumed that the 1st and 3rd battalions have increased their combat strength to a certain extent due to the long period of calm and the training that has certainly taken place during this time. Now, it actually goes on, or rather there are more documents here that go into a lot of detail in where these different subunits were deployed, and I added that to the visualization. So here we have what the Germans knew about the Russian deployments, and what's obviously most interesting for them at this point, because the main target was still the minewood. 1st and 2nd Company of Rifle Regiment 120 was in the minewood, and the 7th Company, Rifle Regiment 303, was up here on the hill behind the minewood in this trench system or trench line here. Most of the rest of the 1st Battalion of Rifle Regiment 303 was back near the bush trench and other of the 3rd Battalion here in the Skywood or the Toothbrush, or behind the Toothbrush to a degree. The rest of the trenches here, this one which the Germans called the Amberg, and this one which they called the East Trench or Ostgraben. These two were held by the 3rd and the 9th Company, both of Rifle Regiment 120. In the Minewood, they also apparently, which is, didn't have the space to put that on the map, but they also had an SMG company in there and at least one 45mm anti-tank gun. Now to the actual plan that the Germans were running at this point. The reinforced 3rd Battalion will attack the enemy in the East Trench, Amberg Hill and Minewood trench systems on A day and at X time. After the attack, the main battle line is to be advanced to this line so that the bases of the Toothbrush Forest and the Scythe can be seen. The connecting trenches Hildebrand 1-4, leading north in the Russian trench system, are to be permanently blocked by destruction. At the same time, the line of the combat outposts is to be moved approximately 300 meters northwards in the section west of the Minewoods. A-Day is set to the 7th of October 1942. X-time 4:28 p.m. Just to make it clear, that means this Minewood, of course, was to be seized, and they wanted to advance at least enough to be roughly here in order to see into this area, like the Scythe would. And the same over here, they wanted to seize these forward positions, so because of the topography they would then be able to look directly into the Toothbrush. So this is the area that they were after, and this line here would then also be moved forward, because it wouldn't be threatened anymore from the flank by the Minewood. It's basically the scheme here. The trenches Hildebrand 1-4 were these here, which lead from this new position back into the Russian position. These would have to be demolished by attached pioneers so that the Russians couldn't use them to attack back into their old positions. So what were the actual forces? As indicated, a 3rd Battalion of the 20th Infantry Regiment would attack, and this consisted, of course, of different companies. Some of them were attached from a different battalion as well, I think. So what's important for us? 11th Company. And here you can see the attachment. One platoon of the motorcycle battalion, 3rd Company, Motorcycle Battalion 40, one heavy MG group, one pioneer platoon with one flamethrower attached, and VB always stands for forward observer, and this is the battery. In this case, I think those are either mortars or light infantry guns. This forward observer here, which is attached to the 9th Company, on the other hand, was for one of the batteries of Artillery Regiment 10, so 10.5 centimeter or 15 centimeter. Generally speaking, all of them, you have 11th Company, 9th Company, 1st Company, 10th Company and 5th Company. These all were similarly equipped, although 10th Company did not have like a heavy MG group attached. Here you can also see the forward observer is for the infantry gun platoon of the motorcycle battalion. And now we're getting into the interesting thing, which is the heavy artillery support. Especially for an operation like that, you need a fire plan. In this case, it's relatively simple. So from X-2 to X o'clock, fire on Amberg. Starting on X o'clock, fire with heavy projectiles using 148 rounds, incendiary and high explosive onto the Minewood, and 12 rounds onto the Blackwood, which was on the other side of the river. What they mean with that is this kind of weapon here, which came in 32 centimeter, like here, or maybe 28 centimeter sometimes. And apparently they had incendiary or flame ammunition for that. And they wanted to unload all of 148 rounds, which were used or shot from these kind of racks here, in one go onto the Minewood in order to destroy the garrison there and probably set the wood on fire, realistically. From X o'clock, shielding of the break-in points by fire on the Blackwood, and then they name a bunch of other target points like the toothbrush, the sickle or scythe, something called boot, which I'm not sure which wood that is, but these are all target points that after the battle begins, the artillery was to fire on in order to prevent Russians from counterattacking. It goes on then. The shielding fire with a scattering of smoke ammunition is to be planned for a period of 1 hour, namely from X to X plus 32 in more lively fire, from X plus 32 to X plus 60 if necessary, again in calm fire. It then also goes on to say what will happen after the operation, that they still were to be on call to, for example, to start defensive fires in case of a Russian counterattack, stuff like that. We will now look at what actually happens going from one company to the next. So each assault company submitted a report that we will quickly read. After that, we will look at the map and try to follow what happened on there. That's kind of the plan. We will go through the battlefield from the east over to the west. Starting with the motorcycle guys. The platoon of the 3rd Company of the 40th Motorcycle Regiment, which is subordinate to the 11th Company, breaks out of position at 4:28 p.m. and, after being attacked by the enemy in the East Trench with a machine gun and a few rifle shots, reaches the southern edge of the East Trench at 4:45 p.m. despite enemy action from grenade launchers and machine guns on the right flank. The enemy, who recognizes the attack along the entire front, retreats into the Toothbrush Grove without significant resistance after the first salvos of hand grenades. At 5:05 p.m., the East Trench is taken as far as the junction to Amberg. The vanguard advances further north through the trench. The Engineers Destruction Squad destroys the trench north of the trench junction to Amberg. At 5:38 p.m., the security of the destruction work returns to the East Trench. At 4:45 p.m., the main battle line is established and the barrage fire is fired. We'll carry on. Reinforced 11th Company advances towards Amberg at 4:28 p.m. and reaches the southern edge of the trench at 4:38 p.m. The other two platoons follow closely behind, echeloned to the right and left. Shortly before breaking in, 11th Company received heavy flanking fire from the southern edge of the scythe. Lieutenant Schenkel, leader of the platoon, is wounded. Sergeant Heinrich immediately takes over the front platoon and breaks in. In tough close combat, 11th Company rolls up the Amberg position by 4:42 p.m. The platoon pursues the retreating enemy units deep into the Little Toothbrush Forest, from which the enemy reserves also flee indiscriminately. The Pioneers Destruction Squad destroys Hildebrand 2 trench, and at 5:28 p.m. the platoon retreats from the southern edge of the Toothbrush Forest to the position. The platoon rolling up to the right establishes contact with the motorcycle platoon in the East Trench at 17:05. The left platoon rolling up from Amberg to the west receives particularly heavy fire from the southern part of Scythe, Hildebrand 3, and the northern part of the Minewood. It reaches its target at 17:12 and moves to the left with strong protection because the companies advancing on the left flank are slowly gaining ground against the toughly fighting enemy. Alright, let's zoom in and put some of that into context. So we have these two units. The motorcyclists started down here. 11th Company started here at Steiermark 2. And this is what happened on the map, just to reiterate. We see the motorcycle platoon crossed over here, broke into the East Trench. 11th Company broke into Amberg, and as you heard, it went pretty well. They actually exploited up until the Toothbrush and went into there later as well. Here you can see the situation then at 17:30, I think, where you can see them going into the Toothbrush, and demolition work here at the trench as well, here at the trench as well. The other units of 11th Company or other platoons taking up defensive positions in the newly gained Russian trenches. And then, in the end, we see these symbols denote that the trenches have been demolished, so the ones leading deeper into the Russian positions. And these are the end positions of 11th Company and the motorcycle platoon over here. in their newly won positions, although some of that was given up a bit later because the front line wasn't to be shifted quite as far forward, but we'll come to that later. But this was kind of the end of the operation in this sector, where it went pretty well. The same cannot be said for 9th Company, which we will look at now. So it says here, reinforced 9th Company breaks out of the trench with the front assault platoon at 4:28 p.m. and immediately receives heavy fire from 12 machine guns from the eastern edge of the mine forest. The attack, which initially proceeds in leaps and bounds, is completely stopped by this fire at 4:40 p.m. The assault platoon returns to its starting position as ordered from 4:40 p.m. Commander of 9th Company sets up the assault platoon further to the right, but there too an attack is not possible due to strong enemy defenses. The assault platoon commander receives orders from the regiment's orderly officer to take Hildebrand 3 via Amberg and emerges from Steiermark 2 north at 5:05 p.m. The assault reached the Hildebrand 3 trench by 5:27 p.m., rolling up the enemy trench system from the left wing of the 11th Company, and advanced to the southern edge of Sizewood by 5:34 p.m. The Pioneers' Destruction Squad destroyed the Hildebrand 3 trench by 5:42 p.m. At 5:13 p.m., the 9th Company received orders from the Steiermark 2 Regimental Observation Post to advance through the mine forest via Steiermark 3 to take Hildebrand 3 and establish a connection between the 11th and 1st Companies. Leaving Steiermark 3 at 5:21 p.m., the 9th Company managed to break through the mine forest by the shortest route and at 5:48 p.m. established a connection between the 11th and 1st Companies in an attack to the north. Here again, we zoom in. This was their deployment zone, roughly in and behind the swamp wood, and their task was to directly attack the mine wood. This can be seen here. They attacked straight at it, but got pinned down in these trenches, or maybe shortly before them, because of that mentioned heavy fire. And yeah, you can see what we talked about earlier. Here are 11th and 11th Company and the motorcyclists. This is all, of course, happening at the same time. Due to the repeated failure of getting into the mine wood, one of the platoons was sent up here in this direction in order to get to Hildebrand 3 over here. The other 2 platoons went down in this direction towards Steiermark 3 to attack the mine wood from there, because their other progress had been made. We will talk about that later. Yeah, and then they basically curved around here and went into the mine wood from this angle. And over here, their assault platoon took up position here and managed to cover the Pioneers, who blew up Hildebrand 3 over here. So despite a bad start, it did end up being quite successful. Lastly, we look at 1st and 11th Company. Reinforced 1st Company moves out of the starting position for the assault at 4:31 p.m. and reaches the bush 150 meters southeast of the West Mine Forest through the hollow west of the mine forest without defensive fire. At 4:40 p.m., the spearhead of the attack receives heavy fire from snipers from the sap on the western edge of the hill. Crawling forward to the left under cover, the front platoon manages to push past the west of the sap and reach its target by 5:08 p.m. Heavy fire from Russian anti-tank gun accelerates the immediate digging in. The platoon's right machine gun fights the enemy in the sap and thus helps the other 2 platoons advance. The 2nd platoon, moving to the right rear of the assault platoon, slowly works its way towards the sap in leaps and bounds, and, slowly working its way forward against the lively firing of snipers with mutual fire support, reaches the enemy sap within hand grenade throwing range at 5:21 p.m. After a few bursts of flamethrower fire in the middle of the enemy riflemen, the breakthrough into the sap succeeds. The platoon rolls up the Hildebrand 4 trench to the southern edge of the bush trench without any further significant resistance and takes the enemy's front position in the bush trench at 5:39 p.m. The Engineers' Destruction Squad destroys Hildebrand 4 trench. The 3rd platoon advances through the sap in the trench system towards the mine forest and secures the gap between the 11th and 1st Companies until the 9th Company arrives. Reinforced 10th Company emerges from the trench with 2 platoons at 4:33 p.m., staggered to the right of 1st Company, and reaches the area west of the western corner of the mine forest without being fired upon by 4:37 p.m. Flank protection is deployed against isolated riflemen firing from the western part of the mine forest, which puts this enemy out of action. Before the 1st Company breaks into the heights, 10th Company manages to make good progress with 1 platoon advancing southwards in the western part of the mine forest and the other advancing southeastwards. The commander of the 3rd Battalion then sends the 3rd Platoon from the south against the mine forest at 5:18 p.m. The southern part and the southeast part of the mine forest are firmly in our hands at 5:21 p.m. and at 5:29 p.m. The bulk of 10th Company is still fighting against the northeast part. After the main enemy forces in the northern parts were destroyed at 1743, 10th Company was deployed between 9th and 1st Company for defense and to build positions for the night. 2 groups of infantry engineers were placed under the command of 3rd Battalion for further clearing of the mine forest. So, again, we return here and we see 10th Company at the swamp wood behind Steiermark 3, 1st Company down here. These were their starting positions. Target, of course, Minewood and the hill. Their approach went without any contact, as we heard, so 10th Company left 1 platoon for fire support in Steiermark 3. The other 2 platoons were moving directly into the Minewood. 1st Company was kind of moving to Minewood, but mostly passed towards this trench system. You can see the progress of the battle here, fighting, including with flamethrowers against this trench system, and here clearing the Minewood against what sounded like mostly desultory resistance, possibly because they got blown up by heavy rocket launchers. And then lastly here we have the end state, with 1st Company having blown Hildebrand 4 and digging in at this line, or at least defending there for the night, and the Minewood being cleared by 10th Company, with 9th Company moving through there in order to get here. Just to get one last look at the complete operation, we are starting here. The initial assault out of the trenches after the big artillery strike, breaking in and seizing the first objectives in order to blow them up, and then consolidating, and also I marked where the trenches were destroyed. Now, one thing you might ask yourself is, because this was mentioned 4 times now, how did they actually destroy these trenches? Well, there's a detailed report by the pioneers, which I won't also translate now, because the video is already getting a bit long, but I have made a little sketch in order to illustrate it and explain it. So, what the Germans did is the following. First, they demolished the section of the trench by putting charges into the walls and then detonating them one after another, which caved in the sides of the walls. This created a kind of kill zone where the Russians had no cover when they came out of their trench and wanted to get into the new German trench. The first part of the German trench, now German trench, was completely filled up with rolls of barbed wire that they had brought for this task, and between that they hid S-mines with either with pressure fuses or by linking them to the barbed wire. So if the Russians moved the barbed wire, they would get a face full of shrapnel. Now, the Russians in the following days tried to clear this. At one point, apparently, they threw like they came out of their trench with a wooden board and let the board fall on top of the barbed wire to launch the S-mines, and they jumped back into their trench. They did stuff like that. After that, at least in one of these trenches, the Germans blew up this part as well, which means that there was this whole mess of just a demolished trench with the earth being full of barbed wire and unexploded S-mines, which must have been horrible to clear, even after the war. That must have been a giant hazard. But yeah, this is basically how these 4 Hildebrand position trenches were cleared. Anyway, this was the end result with the rough new front line. As you can see, these guys were pulled back. I did not sketch in yet, I will maybe do that for a later video, but I did not yet sketch in which new trenches the Germans dug. For example, they connected these trenches up and stuff like that. But yeah, this was the new position that the Germans had created with Operation Hildebrand. And you can also see here what the Germans believed were the losses. With that in mind, you should always know that, of course, you always over-report enemy losses. So this is something to keep in mind. And in fact, we might actually look at some Russian documents soonish. Because the thing is this, there are some mysteries left in this battle. Because while the pioneers were clearing the minewood, they found something quite curious in roughly this area here. They found a 60 centimeter or 70 centimeter roughly diameter hole leading down into a shaft 2 meters deep into the earth. And yeah, this requires some explanation because yeah, the Russians had been scheming as well, and we will look into their documents to see what was going on there. But that's the next video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Hope you are still looking forward to the next one. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.